Right, good evening, all. It's Devora Krasnianski here from Adai Ad, and once again, I'm excited to continue in this series, Marriage Readiness. This series is brought to you by Adai Ad, with a joint project with the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council and MASC. And once again, I'm really grateful to be working with these organizations. Adai Ad is all about empowering couples and enriching relationships. And to that end, we do workshops such as this and several others. We have all kinds of resources on our website. That's adaiad.org, ADAIAD.org. Every morning we send out our daily relationship tip. It's sent via WhatsApp and social media. And you can sign up for that at our website at adaiad.org, ADAIAD.org. /just-one-thing, or you can find it on the menu in the website. This event is part of a series of workshops and education that's been funded by a grant from the New York City's Council's Domestic Violence Empowerment Initiative to the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council on the recommendation of Council Member Matthew Eugene. So we're really grateful for that. So we can do series such as this one. Tonight is the fifth in this marriage series, Marriage Readiness. And I'm really excited about this topic, about preparing for a successful marriage. And we'll be covering tools and mindsets that really make the difference in setting up your relationship. And to that, I'm really excited to have you, Basie. So thank you for joining us, Basie Rosenblat. And Basie's a psychiatric social work and family therapist with private practice in Brooklyn and in Lakewood. And Basie, you can tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and the topic that we'll be covering. So thank you, Basie, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Hi, everybody. This is my first time on this Adai Ad series event. I am a therapist in Brooklyn and Lakewood, and I treat adults, couples, and people who are dating, people who are thinking about getting married and trying to figure out how to get married. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about because there are so many choices, and it's so good to help people narrow it down and try to figure out what's going to help them and how they're going to make this work. So I'm going to let you begin, Devora, with what you would like to talk about, and then I'll jump in with what I think is helpful.
Okay, so we were talking about tools and mindsets that are important to know for marriage, but to know before marriage as we're setting up to prepare for marriage. So there's so many. I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to cover all of them, but what would you say is one of the most important things to consider, to know?
Okay. So, I tell everybody, people I speak to, I say, it's a big job to get married. It is. It's got to find the right person, and you have to sort out what's right for you and what works and what family works for you. Getting married is one part of it, and staying married is the other part of it, because I think it's exciting to get married, and it's exciting to go through all of those sorting out and figuring it out for a while anyway. And then when we get married, it's a task to stay married. So one of the things I mentioned to Devora today was the idea of flexibility and being a flexible person, because there are so many things that we want and we think about, and we have a long list of what we should have and what we could have and what we would like to have. And they're all good. They're all great. They sound good and they're valid, and you would want to have all of them. Flexibility is the key to having the best life. It's not always the checklist of, I want this and I think I should have that. It's being flexible and thinking, this sounds good. Maybe there's something else that sounds like, I'm not so sure about that. And maybe figuring out why you're not so sure about that, and putting your priorities in a place where, even though I thought that this is important for me, maybe it's not that important. Maybe I could look away at something that I thought was important, and maybe I can figure out how to make this thing work. So that's just in terms of choosing somebody that you're going to live with the rest of your life, and being flexible and not getting stuck. Right before I got on this phone call, I had somebody call me, and she's thinking about dating somebody, and she was married for a short time herself, and he has a child. And this guy sounds like everything she wants. He has a child. And she says, so do I consider that? That's being flexible. You know, she'll have to figure out, can she do this or can she? But it's not a one-off no. It's not like, I'm not going to do that. He sounds like everything that I would like, maybe it could be considered. Maybe it's something I could think about. Maybe I'm dating somebody who would like to move to Israel, and I never thought about that. I have somebody I spoke to tonight who lives in Israel and wanted to live here when they got married, and he's dating a girl from Israel, and the girl said, I would like to start out and live in Israel for 3 years. And he tells me, guess what? I think I'm going to live in Israel. So that is being flexible. It's not always what you think it's going to be. And saying, listen, I'm going to come out of my comfort zone. It's not exactly what I expected, but I can go there. So I think if we think about that before we get married, we can open up our horizon. We can open up the spectrum of so many things that are available to us if we're a little more flexible about what we can live with, what we can accept in our lives, the type of family, the location of the family, the location of what somebody of where somebody would want to live, the profession, what somebody's going to do. I didn't expect that. I thought it would be something different. So those are parts of being flexible. I'm looking at what you wrote here, Devora, and there are so many nice things here. You mentioned humility and honesty and available to hearing somebody else. There's a whole list of stuff here. I try to keep it narrow. I try to keep the focus narrow so that we don't,
Sure.
I don't want to go off the rails. And I would like to focus on flexibility. Not only, this discusses just readiness for marriage, or when people are married as well.
They're getting ready for marriage, and the tools that we would need in marriage, but now before being married is time to really hone those.
Okay, so we're not talking about actual couples who are married. We're talking about getting there.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not going to go to the place of how to be flexible once you're married. I think this is something that you're doing on your own. And there's another part here that I think is very important as well. And not everybody has the same kind of support system at home. Some people are blessed with very supportive families and people who help them out a lot and can encourage them and can walk them through a situation that doesn't seem so easy. And getting married is the biggest decision you'll ever make in your life, I think. And it takes a supportive somebody in your life who's going to help you do that. Somebody's going to say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I think it's good. I think that you might want to consider this, even if it's not the thing that you always thought about. So having somebody to give you that little extra push is extremely helpful. And some of us are lucky enough to have that built-in system. To have a built-in system where you have parents who can parent an older sibling, a relative, a mentor, somebody from school, somebody that you know, somebody who helps you walk through this process. If you don't have that, seek it out. Seek it out. Seek out somebody to speak with. It doesn't have to be a therapist. Really doesn't. You know, we're good at what we do. We're not the only game in town. There are lots of people that you can talk to. There's the Rub in your shul. There's a Rebbitzin who could be very bright and very smart that you can talk to and you can refer to and say, listen, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? There are dating coaches. There are people who help you with this process. But I think when we talk about being flexible, that's hard enough. And you're left with some doubts. Discuss it with somebody. Go to somebody and, you know, we always talk about being shoal to talk to somebody about a decision that I should or shouldn't make. Don't just leave it to your own devices and think, oh, okay, that didn't work. I don't know. I'm just going to let it go. Cover the topic with somebody. Speak to somebody. There are people who have a lot of wisdom. There are people who have a lot of experience, and they're not gaining or losing anything by advising you one way or another. Go to somebody who you know has your best interest in hand and talk to them about it. And what could seem impossible could suddenly become feasible. You know, when you say, look, there are so many things here that could work. I'm not sure about the things that can't work. I don't know what to do. Don't just drop it. Go to somebody and have a conversation with them. That's also part of being flexible, because flexible means I'm not stuck in my own thinking. I can go to somebody and have a conversation about it and talk it through. And to do something as big as this, to get married without the support that we need, I'm looking at it right here that you have asked for help and support. Yeah, you know, we're very vulnerable at that time. You know, I'm not sure, it's a lifelong decision. Should I do this? And sometimes we just need that little extra that somebody is going to say, come on, you can do this. You can do this, and you can make it happen. And sometimes you see the most unlikely people find common ground and they make it happen and they make it work. And nobody ever thought that that would be the case. Nobody ever thought that these two people would be able to spend their lives together. So it's pretty awesome to think about two people in the world who never knew each other and just find each other somewhere and create a life and create a family and create everything that goes with it. So, yeah. So that's my little spiel on, you know, being flexible and being able to seek out help so that you can make that move when you're flexible. When everything seems perfect, and it seems, I don't know what perfect is, but when everything just seems like so prescribed and this is so easy and I could do this, you know, it's a little easier. But when something's drop quirky or drop different than you expected, get some help and see if you can make this happen. Devora, anything you wanted to say?
So I think that starting off with that flexibility and asking for insight, I think is something that you can pull through the rest of your life. And I think that the idea of how to ask and how to be flexible, especially if you didn't start off being so flexible. So do you have any insight about how to bring yourself to be more flexible if you weren't so flexible to begin?
So, yeah, good question. So as we all know, there are people who are more rigid than others. There are people who do well with flexibility. They're much more flexible than others. That's a little harder. That is a little harder. For somebody who is not that flexible, they may have more of a challenge in being able to take themselves out of their comfort zone if they're not as easygoing. So they may want to seek out the help of a professional who can help them. But before they do that, they have to understand if they're a little more rigid and get honest with yourself about that. Am I able to go with the flow do things really get to me if it's not exactly the way I wanted it? If somebody is maybe a little late, maybe does something a little different, maybe they changed the recipe and I didn't want it to be exactly that way. Do I get thrown a little bit when things are not the way I want them to be? Do I also have that little bit of perfectionism in me? And perfectionism, that's like a whole other deal. That's a whole other piece. But if you think you have that perfectionist part of you, that certainly has to be dealt with, because there's nobody in this world who's perfect. Nobody. And even you who thinks you're perfect, the part about you that's so perfect is not so perfect. So it's very hard to live with perfection and to measure up to perfection. People have a very hard time living with spouses who expect perfection on every level. It can become very, very challenging. So that's something that does require a little more insight. And I don't think that your local rabbi can help you improve your perfectionism. I think that's something, there are things that people have personalities where they want everything to be perfect. So when I talk about being more flexible, I'm not addressing that. That becomes a little more clinical. When you look at something that is so, it's so challenging and it gets in the way of people's lives. If things are not perfect, this is going to be a hard deal for them. So perfectionism is something that has to be dealt with. And that is something that keeps people from advancing in their lives as well. There are some people who are fortunate enough, believe it or not, who are perfectionists, and they marry somebody who is very easygoing, very just doesn't live by the book. And they're fortunate enough to have somebody who can balance that. And if you have two people like that, that can get really dicey and really interesting. But I think what we're talking about here is just your average person. Your average person. We're not talking about anything that requires anything that gets in the way, that impedes somebody's future or somebody's ability to be in a relationship. We're talking about people who do have a little more of a quest for perfection. And so to them, we're saying, look, take a look at yourself and see, am I one of those people who always needs it to be perfect? And what kind of a spouse would I make? Will I be the good spouse? Or will I be able to roll with the punches and just say, hey, that was funny. Okay, something wasn't exactly the way I wanted it to be. That's fine. So it's about flexibility. It's about knowing who you are and taking a look at yourself and maybe asking somebody, it's like, how do I strike you? Like, do I come across as somebody who's flexible? Do I come across as somebody who's easy to get along with? Do I come across as somebody who can make decisions easily? Or do I belabor everything? Do I sweat everything? How does this work? And I think you get a better look at yourself.
And that takes some vulnerability, as we were, it's also like that whole idea of, I need to be perfect. So if you notice that about yourself, then go address it. But if you mentioned about asking somebody, and that takes some vulnerability, and if you find yourself challenged in asking that, and not having vulnerability, maybe it's worth looking at that, because flexibility, vulnerability, these are things that are important in the marriage too, and really in all aspects of life. So,
if I'm using concepts and saying words here that sound foreign and crazy, and like, where did that ever come up in a marriage? Vulnerability and flexibility. People just get married. They're not vulnerable. They're not flexible. They just get married. They get the whole. These are concepts that exist every single day, except you don't know it. You don't know it. I'm giving it a name. I'm calling it something. And the idea of being able to be when I say flexible, that means we use it used to use words like giving in and being able to just let somebody have their way, not all the time, but that's when you're getting a little further into the relationship. It doesn't always have to be the way you want it, and it's okay if it's not. I want to talk about 3 different types of relationships, if it's okay with you.
Let's go with that.
Okay. I think this is very important to know and to be able to understand. I'm just going to grab a paper. Give me 1 second here. Okay. And you'll tell me if you can see me, okay, Devora?
Go ahead. So far.
Okay. So I'm going to draw 3 different types of relationships, okay? Can you see that? There are 2 circles here?
Circle so far. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to give this couple a name, okay? This is Yaakov and this is Malka, okay? So this is one couple. Then there's another couple whose marriage looks like this. Somewhere in here is Yaakov and somewhere in here is Malka. Then there's another couple whose marriage looks like this. This is Yaakov and this is Malka. Okay, and I'm going to give each one of these relationships a name. Okay, so the name of this couple, Yaakov and Malka, and this couple is called Interdependent. They have an independent marriage. That means Yaakov lives here and Malka lives here, but they live in one house. They live in one house, Yaakov and Malka. Yaakov does his thing, Malka does her thing, and, they schmooze occasionally, and, Malka goes to work, Yaakov goes to work, and I meet couples like this all the time. And they come in and they say, what is wrong? What is wrong in our marriage? We go to work, we have children, we don't know anything about each other, we don't share anything, we live 2 separate lives. That's one type of marriage. Then we have a marriage that looks like this, looks like a big hot mess. And this couple lives in this house, and this couple has what we call a codependent relationship. And codependent is, it's a hot mess.
I see it, yeah.
It's a hot mess because they support each other's behaviors, not necessarily good behaviors, and they can't get away from that. It's like they never evaluate what's happening in this marriage. Is this good? Is it not good? And often we see these kind of marriages that one will support another person's behavior, and then something happens and they say, that's unhealthy. That is unhealthy, and they start to realize that this codependent relationship is unhealthy. This is the healthiest relationship that we're looking for, and this is called interdependent. Okay, and Yaakov and Malka live in a nice house, but they're interdependent, which means Yaakov goes off every day and does what he does. Malka does every day what she does. And they're good doing what they do. But they also have this beautiful space right here where it's the 2 of them. And they share their lives right here. It's not all day, every day, all the time, every minute. It's not if I do something, you must be there right with me. If I want to do this, is this dysfunctional as it is, you support me. No. In this marriage, somebody can look at it and say, no, that's not okay. And we have a conversation about it right here. This marriage doesn't really ever do that because they don't really know what's going on. So Yaakov is off in his little world. Malka's off in her little world. And they just kind of live together and somebody pays the rent. like something happens. What we're looking for is a marriage where we have our space. I get to do what I need to do. You get to go to your shul, go to yeshiva. When you go to shul at night, I'm not standing at the door, blocking the door and saying, oh, no, you can't leave. You need to stay here with me right now. What kind of marriage is that? That's this. But in a healthy marriage, when Yaakov has to go to daven, Malka gets that. When Malka has to go to a PTA meeting, or she wants to go to work, or she wants to go take an enrichment course or do something, anything, Yaakov says, I can babysit for you. I can babysit for the kids. We could do that. You can go out, and we can also spend time together. And this is what you want to look at. When you're dating somebody, you want to look for this kind of marriage where we each have our own definition of who we are, but we really enjoy spending time together. And we're okay when we're away from each other as well. Any thoughts, Devora?
Right. And so in this interdependent marriage,
Yeah.
Some of those conversations I imagine are easy and loving, and sometimes they are more challenging, and that's okay too. And that needs some vulnerability, that needs some conversation, as opposed to that first one where they maybe are so separate because they don't want to talk about things, or they don't care that much about each other's lives. Like, how does that?
Are we talking about the interdependent marriage, the last one?
Well, the interdependent is how do we, the question is, how do we build that, as opposed to when we're starting off this new relationship, they really are two separate people. So they start off as the Yaakov and Malka, and then sometimes they get married and stay with those two separate. But how do we bring them?
That's
together?
here. That's here.
So
right?
how do we become separate from a year ago? We didn't even know each other, so we were two
So
separate.
there is a concept called attachment. Attachment is something that we generally bring from home with us to a relationship. Something that we've seen at home. It's something that we've observed. How do people relate to each other? So if we've grown up in a home that looks like this, where you have two adults who rarely ever talk to each other, they're like two ships in the night. They just like cross like that. That's probably what you're headed for, because you don't know differently. But if you grew up in a house that looks like this, where mom and dad, where Malka and Yaakov go out and spend time, where Malka and Yaakov go for a walk, where Malka and Yaakov play a game of chess, where Malka and Yaakov sit down and eat dinner together. This couple never eats dinner together, or if they do, they're not even looking at each other. He's on his phone, and she's doing this while he's on his phone.
Mhm.
Right? This couple he's telling her, you look at what I want you to look at right now, because this is what's important to me, and let's talk about that.
Mhm.
And so it's like they're living in each other's space. This couple sits down for dinner and the phones are off and everything gets shut down and put away. And they're having a conversation with each other and finding out about each other's day and enjoying each other's company and laughing and maybe having an argument, maybe having a huge fight, which is okay too, because at least they're talking to each other. And every couple will have a fight about something at some point, but then they get to make up and figure out the differences. But if they're not talking to each other, they don't even know what the other person is thinking. Now, when we live in this kind of a setting, this interdependent setting, there's something called the 10 Commandments of an interdependent marriage. It's a very interesting scale. that I do with couples, and it's how each one protects the other one. The 10 Commandments of Interdependent Marriage. It comes by a guy by the name of Stan Tatkin. I think he came up with it. Stanley Tatkin. And
Is there a book? Is there that a book or something that people can read?
It comes out as part of a book. And when we talk about interdependent, they have each other's back. And having somebody else's back only happens when somebody can be flexible, because it's not always going to be about you being first. Sometimes you'll be first, but you also want to make sure that the other person feels considered and feels heard and feels like, hey, I have somebody who's in there with me. I have somebody who goes off every day and does whatever they do. I have somebody who's has their own life and isn't dependent on me for every minute of their existence, because we call that codependent. I also don't want a life where I don't even know what's happening with my wife. I don't even know what's happening with my husband. So I don't want that life either. Oops, sorry, I don't know what happened here. Sorry, I just came back. So let me see, there's something on the chat here. Yeah, so when we talk about being flexible, we're talking about not only being flexible to be able to get married, it's being able to be flexible to stay married. And all of the things that you have here, humility, availability, hearing someone else, honesty. I mean, yeah, like honesty, like well, that if you're not honest, it's like, you know, there's not a lot of good things happening. But all of these are components for a healthy interdependent marriage, where we have our own space and we also have this nice sphere, this nice unit, where we have a definition in our marriage. It's us and it's us. It's us here and us together. And when you're dating, you want to see, is this a person who cares about me as much as I will care about him?
Or her.
Or her. Or us.
Well,
right?
Yeah, there's also the caring about us, about the relationship. It's not only caring about me, but
A relationship takes work. It doesn't just happen. Whether it's sitting down at night for 5 minutes if you're so busy, and just reviewing the events of the day, whether it's sitting down at dinner, whether it's, not everybody can do that, they run different schedules, whether it's taking a walk once a week, whether it's taking a drive, going to visit somebody. It could be anything. It could be anything, leaving a note for somebody. And yeah, so the 10 Commandments are certainly something that let me see if I have it here. Let me just take a look. Just tell me when you want me to stop, because.
So what I'm also understanding, while you look for the 10 Commandments, I understand in order to have this kind of interdependent and that overlap space, there has to be a certain amount of wanting that for the relationship, not only like actually putting in the time for not only for the other person, but for the nurturing the relationship, nurturing the marriage.
Right. So what I do with couples usually when I see them, and they could be engaged or married, because a lot of these are relevant to either one. So what I do is I give them both a copy of the 10 Commandments, and I say, let's rate this from 1 to 10. with 1 being the least and 10 being the most. And how do you feel you're doing with this? So I'll give you an example of one of them. Protect your partner in public and in private from harmful elements, including from yourself. Okay, so that means if somebody would say something embarrassing, or me, if I would embarrass my partner in public, right? So how much do I do that? How careful am I about that? On a scale of 1 to 10, where do I rate? Let's take a look at this one. Base your relationship on true mutuality, remembering that all decisions and actions must be good for you and for your partner. So if your partner can't stand the hot weather, cannot stand the hot weather, I think Florida is probably not the place to choose. If somebody can't stand the freezing cold weather, I don't think Utah's on the map. So, you need to figure out, and maybe they can, maybe they can't. And that's just one teeny tiny little example. But am I as concerned about this person as I am about myself? Do I eliminate all threats to the existence of the relationship? Do I eliminate all threats? When somebody walks into the house, am I on the phone and I don't even gaze at the person who just came in? It's like they don't even exist. It sounds weird when you're dating, like, oh, I would never do that. That would never happen. But it does. It does. And it doesn't only happen that, it could happen while you're dating. You meet somebody, you're out and you meet somebody and you're like, all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you're talking to them for the next 15 minutes and somebody's just standing there, just like cooling their heels and saying like, okay, what's going on here? Right? So I don't know. And then you have to see, if they get angry, maybe they have a little bit of an anger issue, but if they're flexible about it, they can say, yeah, I'm so glad you were talking to your friend. But you can't overdo that either, because there's a balance. There's this piece where you have your space and where you have your shared space. So that's a really important thing to remember. Okay, do we want to take we're here till 9:30. Do we want to take some questions? Do we want to?
So someone asked about healthy fights versus fighting in an unhealthy way. So what would be a way to fight more healthily? Because like you said, we have different perspectives, conflicts.
What would be a way to fight in a healthy way? So I would like to take the word fight out of the thing. We can call it to disagree. So we can always agree to disagree. It's healthy to disagree. You're two independent people and you can disagree on things. And if you can both walk away from that disagreement feeling heard, at least heard and validated, I hear what you're saying. And I hear that what you're saying makes sense. I'm not sure I can do that, but it has validity. And if you feel heard and understood, doesn't mean you have to be agreed with. Then I think that's a healthy way to have a disagreement. There's one other piece, and that is there has to be a balance. There can't be the same person winning every single time. It's like sometimes you win, sometimes they win. It can't be, it's like a string of somebody feeling like, because when you have that, when you have one person, then you're in a codependent situation. You're supporting something that's unhealthy. And it's one person taking the balance of the relationship and making it work the way they want it to, and it's unhealthy. And you're supporting that unhealth. So, but in a healthy relationship, there's another whole piece, which is how to have a conversation and how to be a good listener and how to listen to somebody when they speak to you and to genuinely listen and to feel interested and to be interested and not to brush them off with like, oh, I knew that already. Oh, who cares about that? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, that's so dumb. Hello, that's so dumb. I know that already. It's like somebody hears that show is over. So it's the way we listen. It's the way we make a person feel heard, even if they're saying something that isn't that significant. It's the way we make a person feel that they said something, and that's important because they said it. That's it. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It really doesn't. It could just be anything that they think is important. If it's important to you, it's important to me. What else do we have?
Let's see if any other questions came in. Okay. Going back back to the beginning when we spoke about dating. This person is talking about a real fear of not getting it right, not getting not getting into the right marriage or not staying in the marriage.
Right.
How can we address that fear?
Right. So the question is this person fearful of other things as well? Is it only about this? Are they fearful about not getting the perfect dress when they go to an occasion, or not getting the right shoes or the right? Is it always about having the perfect thing? And in fact, I don't think anybody ever really has a guarantee on that. I don't think anybody does. It's a leap of faith. And that's what we had spoken about earlier. If somebody is in fact unsure, that's where they need to go to speak to somebody. And it sounds interesting to say this, but sometimes the people who think they had it right and it seems so perfect, it isn't really that perfect. And sometimes the people who thought they were taking this great leap of faith, it works. It just works. So it's a risk, whatever you do. It's always a risk. There isn't a paper that comes down, this like flame that comes down and says, oh, it's this one and it's that one. We try our best. We really try our best to make the best decision we can. But it's not only about making the decision. It's about making the decision work. It's about making the decision and then making that decision work.
Right.
And if I could just put in a plug for one thing here, just like be happy, like just smile, find what's good in people. Don't belabor it. Don't get crazy about every little thing. Focus on what's right and notice what's right rather than notice what's wrong. In yourself, in the person you're with, in your family, whoever you're with, just focus on what's good. You'll be so much happier. And everybody else will be so much happier. Imagine somebody walks into the house and says, oh, you didn't do this. And oh, you know what you forgot this morning? And I was expecting. And so they walk and say, hey, it's so good to see you. I'm so happy when you're home. It's so nice. Hey, everybody, look who's here. That makes somebody feel great.
Right. Definitely.
Right? And focus on what's good. Focus on where you find the strength and the wisdom in other people. See it, find it. Don't always pick up like what's not good. Gotcha. You know, that's no good.
Oh, there is that negativity bias. We notice what's the more the negative, but we should be focusing more on the positives. If we start off the morning of something wonderful.
That's also, I mean, we see this familially, you know, people who grow up in a negative environment, unless they short circuit that, will be more negative. So start to notice if there's negativity around you, and if there is that vibe, correct that, fix that, and work on that. Everybody feels much better around people who are happy than people who are miserable. And this is true in a setting as well, of just your spouse and yourself.
And even at work.
Anywhere.
Right.
It's true anywhere.
So someone was asking about how much time to spend together. And if someone's working at home all the time, if you're both working at home, what's the right balance of how much time and how much space to give each other?
Right. That's a really good question, especially now when there are so many people who operate out of their houses and out of their homes. So even when you work together in your home, you can still have your space. You know, you don't work in the same room. Some people do work in businesses together. That's always a little challenging. But I think that people can give each other their own space and they can decide on if they can meet it in the evening, go out for coffee, run out for breakfast. It doesn't have to be in the evening. If your schedule allows for it, do a lunch once a week, once a month. Go out for coffee. Bring home coffee and have it at your table. Just celebrate each other, even in tiny little increments. But don't let that get stale. Don't let that get old. And it doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be costly. It has to be you. That's all it has to be.
And it has to be.
It has to be. You know, this person I saw once, they had no money. They had very, very little money. And she was trying to figure out how to celebrate her husband's birthday. And she said, we decided we were going to put away any money we had for Adai Ad. She said, but I wanted to do something special. So that morning she took shaving cream and on the mirror in the bathroom, she put his name on and blah, 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 and whatever she did. And she said, that's all I could do. But she said, I remembered and it was so meaningful. And she said, when we had more money and we were able to spend more money on the things we did, she said, that was the thing we always talked about. That was so precious to us that we had no money for anything, but we still had money for that. So it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be grand. It has to be you. It has to be you. It has to be the authentic you who wants to have the interdependent, where you have your own space, which is what we talked about, and carving out a little space for each other. You know, God willing, you have a family, the space becomes harder and harder to carve out, but you still manage to do it.
And I guess this is about talking about how much time you need. Like if one of you wants to spend more time, not into the messy, chaotic, but maybe one coming from a family where the parents spend three breakfasts together, and that's what they were expecting, and the other one comes from a family where they spend one evening together. So how do we navigate that?
So that comes back to flexibility, that it's not necessarily going to be what you're accustomed to. And I think everything is worth trying. You know, we can try to do this and see how that works. And it may not be exactly what I had. It may not be exactly what I was used to, but I'm willing to give this a shot and see if that works. And I would love something a little more. Let's see what we could do. And there's one other piece that I think is just like a little important here. When you're finally going to have that half hour together, don't spend that half hour talking about how you don't have the other half hour. Like, enjoy the half hour. Like, if you spend that time talking about, oh, so we're here together now for a half hour, but really, we should have been together on Monday and we should have spent the hour. You're losing what you have.
Right.
Cherish that time. Use it well. Plan for it. Think in your head. Like, I'm going to go there. I don't want to be negative because I come out of there and we both will feel like that wasn't so great.
Right.
Right?
And the final question, when we talk about flexibility, how does that work with the concept of being mavater?
So I think flexibility and batranas is really one and the same. It really is. But it's a little different because if somebody is mavater, then they're saying, okay, have it your way. Okay. I don't think it's a good idea for somebody to always be giving in because they will build up a resentment. But you hope that the person that they're married to will recognize that it can't always be that way. So I think somebody needs to be able to point out, say, listen, we did it this way this week. Let's do it the other week. So you want to be able to give in. You want to be able to be flexible, but you also don't want to be a doormat. You know, you don't want to be the one who's always. There's a very good author. I'm sure you've all heard of her. She writes The Surrendered Wife and the
Laura Doyle.
The Coward Wife, Laura Doyle. So she is like, her idea of Vatronis is like right out there. Just like make it work. Make it work and make it happen and make it. And she'll put it on you to do all of it. And I have to tell you that it works like a charm until it doesn't. But there is a lot of wisdom in a lot of what she does, because the concept of Vatronis is not something that's known in the world. We grow up with that concept of being able to give in and to be mevater, and we tell our third graders to be mevater. So we understand that concept, which is a very good concept. And the concept of being able to make somebody feel good and being able to make somebody feel empowered, it's all excellent. It's all excellent. But we want there to be something for you, like a little bit. Everybody needs a little bit, because we have to have this shared part where somebody feels like, hey, somebody noticed me. So I think flexibility is very good. I think if we can get ourselves to be flexible and to be mevater, that's very good, but not when you get to the point where you're resenting it. Does that make sense?
And that's a very important piece, is not to resent it. And if you actually are resenting it, it might be worth investigating with somebody, whether it's a mashpia, a friend, a critical, someone who can really help you think, and not always just dump it onto the other person, and not always be on your side, but someone who can really help you think, is this, my resentment reasonable? Or is this something that I could be more flexible about?
Right. And you don't have to think about it all the time. It's not like a 24/7 thing, like who's being flexible, who's giving in. Just like go with the flow. Enjoy your life. Have fun. Dating is fun. Enjoy your life. It's like, it's you know, you don't want to become too tedious and too tiresome, but look at it as an adventure in getting to know people and learning about humanity and humans and different types of people, and allow yourself the gift of imperfection, the gift of flexibility, the gift of, it doesn't have to be exactly what you thought it would be. It could be a little different. It could just be a little different.
But that being said, of course, it still has to make sense on paper, and it still has to make sense. So that's why you run it by.
It doesn't have to make sense on paper. It has to make sense in your heart.
Well, it has to make sense, not just totally the flexibility. Because the Shachan said, these two people, it's like you're going to be flexible to something that's way too wide from who you are.
Right. We're talking about people, I'm assuming, who are intelligent people and who can make intelligent decisions. But I'm asking them to not let their intelligence always get in the way. You know, because sometimes everything has to be so perfect and so planned and so everything. For some people that works. Hey, you know, some people it just comes out that way. And for some people it doesn't. And I think most of the people I know, they were flexible. Either somebody was too short, or somebody's hair was too curly, or they didn't like the location that this family came from. I had a very good friend whose son, they suggested somebody from Australia for my friend's son, and my friend said, there's no way that her son is marrying anybody from Australia. It's not happening. She said, Australia? She said, I never walked out of Borough Park. She said, Australia, it's not happening. And her son dated for a while, and she was at a Shever Brachas, and she sees this adorable person, at the other end of the room. And she says, she's good for my son. And somebody says, that's the girl from Australia. She said, well, maybe I could do it. And she did. So there you go. You know, it's just like, took her a little time to wrap her head around it. And she became a little more flexible. So that was it.
Good for them.
Okay.
All right, this has been great. Someone asked a question about codependence, and to you, we will be doing another session a little bit more about family of origin and how that impacts your marriage. So you're dating in your marriage. That's a whole different conversation. So look out for that one. And there's one other question that I'll reply to in person. So thank you all for joining tonight. If you have any other questions after this, after you actually hear it and like rehash it, definitely send us any questions. You can send it on the website where you got the link to come in to this talk. There's a place for anonymous question. You can fill it out as anonymously, but if it's anonymous, we may not be able to answer you, but definitely reach out to us. And once again, thank you, Basie, for your insights. And thank you all. And thank you all for joining us. The recording of this will be available on the website as well. So thank you all. And good night.
Good night. Take care. Bye-bye.